Are you ready for your next great Civil War read? Then try the new historical novel, The Heavens Falling, by Jonathan Lucci. Follow the members of the Dawson family through the Civil War, from the halls of Congress to the bloody fields of battle, and from the decks of gunboats to the solitude of Lincoln's office. The Heavens Falling is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or visit theheavensfalling.com to order. That's theheavensfalling.com.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott, narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
Enjoy historical stories on the History Fix platform. Explore movies, short films, and documentaries. Addressing Gettysburg podcast fans receive an extra $5 off the first year's annual subscription. Sign up at HistoryFix.com and use promo code Gettysburg. Every subscription includes a 7-day risk-free trial. Escape into history with History Fix.
Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit Bantam Roasters, formerly 82 Cafe at 82 Steinware Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house, and they have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your trip. Visit them at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options for all of their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order in the cafe.
The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the Great Battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg's Ask a Gettysburg Guide. And today we are talking about Longstreets Countermarch. It's one of those parts of the battle that, people are always fascinated by or with. And which is it? By or with? Either way, they're fascinated. And they want to know more about it. And so who better to have with us today to talk about it than the great James Hessler. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Matthew.
Jim,
yes.
Explain to me, what is it that obsesses us so much about this little detail?
Are we obsessed?
I mean, we're not.
Yeah, but
well,
others...
you are. You give a tour. You do a tour.
Yeah, I'm just joking. I actually like. Maybe obsessed would be a strong word.
Okay,
but
fascinated.
I like that.
Thank you.
I think fascinated would work. You know what? I always approach it like a mystery. And who doesn't love a good mystery?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Gettysburg mystery.
That's right.
We're not talking murder mystery. We're not talking bank robbery or skyjacking. But, trying to figure out where exactly these guys went. We have a pretty good idea, but there's pieces to the puzzle that are missing, I think, is a mystery. And then taking that all the way to the conclusion of, does it have any impact and does it mean anything at all? I think all of that is, to me, I think what interests me. So I assume it interests other people. Mm-hmm. And then, you add Longstreet into it. Everybody's favorite Confederate general, Old Pete, kind of stuff. So I that's what interests me. I'm going to assume that's what grabs a lot of other people, too.
I think so. And also that it delayed the fighting on the south end of the field by... What would you say, an hour and a half?
I usually tell people 90 minutes. Porter Alexander, in one of his many accounts, set up to 2 hours. So, Porter Alexander was there. Hessler wasn't. I usually say at least 90 minutes. I do think that.
And all right, so let's get into it then. I guess for those people out there who are new to all this stuff, we should probably give them a little bit of a background to, okay, there's the counter march, but what was the initial march, the pro march I guess it would be.
Just sort of like a little intro kind of thing.
You know what? Let's just start at the morning. Let's start with Captain Johnston's reconnaissance, because that's going to come into play later anyway.
Yeah, you're right. You kind of can't do one without the other. Try as you might sometimes to separate them.
You got to put it in context.
And I know you guys have done a Captain Johnston show. Maybe you've done a couple, but so the morning of July 2nd, Robert E. Lee is looking to have reconnaissance done of the Union left flank and the approaches to the Union left flank. There's a couple scouts. I'm trying not to use the word reconnaissances again. There's a couple scouts that are sent out that morning. Sorties, I like that. Artillery Chief Pendleton being one. But the most famous one is one of the staff engineers led by Captain Samuel Johnston. So early morning, Johnston is told to report to Army headquarters, and he is basically given this assignment to more or less scout the Union left flank, scout the approaches to the left. This would seem to be intended to inform Lee and then ultimately Longstreet in terms of whether or not you can approach and whether or not the Union left flank is vulnerable. And that's kind of how it starts, very early in the morning, like we're talking 4:15-ish in the morning kind of thing. But the day's starting early, and as we'll see, not going to go so smoothly for the Confederates.
I think a lot of people think that Lee tells him to scout Little Round Top, but that's not the order, right? It's just the Union left.
Yeah, and I'm going by memory here, so cut me some slack, folks. I don't have any Johnston crib notes in front of me. But the idea is that basically, scout the left, scout the approach to the left, right? There's no order today that exists, so what we primarily have to go on, and this is where the mystery and the controversy comes in, is a lot of post-battle and post-war accounts that were written by these guys. Round Top, Big Round Top, Little Round Top is certainly going to come into this story, but really right now it just seems to be scout the Union left.
And so the whole thing with Little Round Top is when he gets back and he's showing Lee or telling Lee what he's talking about, he points to Little Round Top on the map, or the area of Little Round Top, and he says, "I got here." Is that about? Am I remembering that right? Because I'm going off of memory too.
Yeah, no, you are. I mean, it's sort of it's kind of always replayed. Lee's got a map out, and Johnston points to... Now, Johnston, in one of his accounts later, said Round Top. Notice there's no big or there's no little attached to that. He basically says, I got up to Round Top where I had a commanding view. Now, I'm going back to my Sickles work. I always kind of remind people, Round Top is used very interchangeably by these guys. So, again, today we think of Little Round Top first, and then we think of Big Round Top as a secondary thing. If I'm an engineer on that field and I'm pointing at Round Top, I'm thinking I'm pointing at the bigger one. So big round top, Little Round Top. Did he get to either one of those? Did he get to Bushman Hill? Did he get to the Eisenhower Inn and Conference Center? All of that is still kind of fair play. But back to your question, and I've already forgotten the question.
Yeah, me too.
The question was, or the answer to the question.
Pointing to it on the map.
Yeah, they point to it on the map. And allegedly, Lee kind of says, you got here? And Johnson says, yes, sir, I got there. And that's, again, what that seems to inform everybody is that the approach can be made, and that the Union left does not extend as far as the Round Tops. Now, for years and years, people always kind of bagged on Johnston and said, oh, that intelligence was wrong. The recon was wrong. No, it's not wrong. By that hour of the morning, the Union left doesn't extend that far. So what Johnston's intelligence is telling Lee is, again, at least as far as it exists in the historical record, it may not be telling Lee exactly where the Union left is, but it does seem to be telling Lee where it isn't, and frankly, how far it doesn't extend. So that And the second piece of that you got there, because that's important too, that you got there basically unmolested. He says, I didn't really see anybody other than passing a couple cavalry troops along the Emmitsburg Road. But the idea that you could get there is an important part of it too. And again, will help convince Lee that the Union left is vulnerable for attack.
Right, and that area of the Round Tops is good for him to stage the attack. Like he can do it without any threat to his flank or anything. Yeah, he would want to know that there's nothing down there.
Yeah,
right?
He'd want to know that nothing would be nothing down there. And what seems to then develop from there, then is that basically they seem to get an idea that the Union left, stopping short somewhere north of Little Round Top. The analogy that's often made on the battlefield today is an assumption that the Union left would probably end around where the Pennsylvania Monument is today. Again, nobody says that per se in so many words, but that's kind of the analogy we make today. And then what seems to kind of develop from there is an idea that, okay, if we can get Longstreet's infantry basically move through the back country, get Longstreet's infantry in position in and around the Peach Orchard area, which is going to play a big part in this, but in the Peach Orchard area, and then if we can kind of sweep up towards Cemetery Hill, we can envelop the enemy's left and drive it in that way.
Right.
And that's, and again, folks, there's a lot of issues with that plan. There is an imperfect understanding of where the Union flank is. There's clearly an imperfect understanding of the terrain, and how the Emmitsburg Road kind of runs in conjunction to Cemetery Ridge and Cemetery Hill. And then, of course, when the whole thing steps off, after 4 o'clock, thanks to the countermarch, a lot of that intel and recon is going to be stale anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And not being aware of the rest of the Union Army and who's coming up. And there's more corps on their way.
Exactly.
Okay, so then Lee gets this information. He develops his plan. About what time would you say Longstreet gets the order to move?
Well, that's kind of, again, that's another one of those things that are debatable, give or take. As we like to say, time is very fluid on the battlefield. But somewhere in my view, around 9 o'clock-ish.
Oh, 9, okay.
Hold on, I haven't finished yet. Somewhere around 9 o'clock-ish, Lee seems to kind of leave to go talk to Ewell and kind of talk over the situation on the, on the Confederate left, or what would be opposite the Union right. So I think, and this is where it gets a little muddy, does Lee leave to talk to Ewell, having already told Longstreet, get your boys ready, we're going to make that move against the left, and that's the way some people interpret it? Or does Lee go over and talk to Ewell and say, okay, we're going to make the main attack against the left? And then does he give Longstreet the order? Because there's some accounts that could kind of pivot it that way as well. So I think what's clear is that Longstreet has an order prior to 11 a.m.
Okay.
Right? Now, again, they've been talking about it all morning. Longstreet's been at headquarters since, 4:30 that morning. So, we're talking by 11 o'clock, the day's already 5.5, 6, 7 hours old kind of thing. So I think Longstreet, if he didn't already have the order, he knew that, okay, with all the conversations we've been having, we're going to be moving opposite the left. But, when he gets an official order, I think he can kind of open for debate. The thing is, though, and Longstreet says this in his report, after getting the order, he realized the Vanderlaw's brigade had not arrived on the field yet. He got permission from General Lee to wait until Law's brigade arrived. And in his report, Longstreet said Law's brigade arrived around noon, and then after that, we began moving.
Okay, so that I just wanted to get that in because that's important, I think. All right, so then they get moving. What do you put it at, around 1 o'clock?
Yeah, you see different accounts. Kershaw, Joseph Kershaw, General Kershaw, whose brigade is in the lead, McLeod, and then some of the other guys, they tend to put the starting time in the 12:30, 1 o'clock sort of neighborhood. I think, what I see a lot of times is people kind of split the difference and go with like a 12:45 kind of start time on that. Right. So, if Longstreet says we didn't move until after Law arrived, then you're probably not talking any earlier than 12:30. And as we'll see with some of the signal stations, we know they're in motion by 1 o'clock. Right. So, 12:30-ish is, in my book, a reasonable estimate, give or take.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned McLeod, and before we move on to the march, we should probably talk about the meeting that they have with Lee.
Yeah.
And the impression Longstreet gets from I guess Lee is meeting with McLeod first, and Longstreet comes into it. Is that right?
Well, sort of, yeah. So they're meeting somewhere near Confederate Army headquarters. Again, is it at the orchard in front of the Thompson House? Some people have a meeting over by the seminary. I've seen some people putting them all the way over at the McMillan House. They're having this meeting somewhere.
Right.
I personally think it's probably near the seminary. Arthur Freemantle says he's up in a tree and he's watching Longstreet and Hood in the American custom of whittling sticks, kind of thing.
Yeah, we love that here.
So they're already having this meeting, right? And it's Lee, it's Longstreet, obviously the assorted staffs and that sort of thing. Hood, of Longstreet's infantry commanders, Hood arrives first. He then joins the meeting, and then McLeod arrives.
Okay.
So by the time McLeod arrives, this has already been in progress.
Got it. So McLeod is the one who's late.
Yeah. And I want to be careful here because there are people who, and I know a couple people, 2 books actually kind of coming out in forthcoming months that they put a lot of the McLeod's accounts kind of in the bunk category kind of thing. Because if you look at it, really, McLeod is the only one who writes about it, his part in any great detail. Well, I don't know that puts it in the bunk category, but it does make you want to stop and question it. So anywho, McLeod gets there. They got this map out as McLeod has always told the story, right? General Lee kind of says, okay, probably pointing to the Peach Orchard-ish area on this map and says, well, General McLeod, I want your troops to get here and place them so. Longstreet is allegedly pacing nearby and says, no, I want you placed kind of opposite that. So one of them, Lee seems to be of the mindset that they would go in kind of perpendicular to the Emmitsburg Road, right, which would be that sweep up to Cemetery Hill, whereas Longstreet kind of seems to want them parallel to the Emmitsburg Road, which would then be more of a push, to the east. So anyways, Longstreet's pacing nearby. He says that. Lee allegedly says, no, General Longstreet, I want him just the opposite sort of thing. McLeod, in his account, will later say to Longstreet, you seemed annoyed about something, but I didn't ask. One of Longstreet's staff officers, Searle, later writes to the effect that, Longstreet seemed annoyed all day kind of thing. Some Longstreet authors say, no, he's not talking about here. But, again, you kind of start splitting hairs over, okay, what time did he get annoyed? Sort of.
Yeah, right.
If he got annoyed at 1:15 p.m., I don't know.
Who cares? What does it matter? So does this give Longstreet the impression then that McLeod is under Lee's direct command? This whole this argument with
that's an interesting question.
The difference of opinion. Or not opinion, but the desires. Lee wants him this way. Longstreet wants him this way. Lee overrides him.
It's an interesting question. Obviously, at Chancellorsville and Salem Church and that sort of thing. Obviously, Longstreet had been absent at Chancellorsville, and McLeod had operated directly under Lee's command. So, you raise an interesting question. Are people kind of thinking, okay, we're still doing that here at Gettysburg? I tend to think not. What I tend to think, is McLeod had come up for some criticism for his performance in the Chancellorsville campaign. And, there's part of me that's kind of thinking it might kind of be the opposite of that. Okay, let's pay special attention to General McLeod. Let's make sure he understands and, even maybe keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't move too slowly. That's always been kind of my take on it, but it's one of those things. It's not stated directly in the records, so you can open it for interpretation.
I mean, none of us in the room here, 6 Questions Lens is with us, by the way. I'm sorry to introduce you before.
He has been kind of silent.
Yeah, he has. None of us in the room here have been in the military, let alone our military officers.
Yeah,
so.
Thanks for rubbing that in.
Well, this is purely opinion unless you've been told the answer to this by someone who knows better than we do. But a commanding general of the Army can certainly, if he wants to, maybe it's not the most
proper.
What?
Proper. I just did my southern accent there.
Right. Maybe it's not the most proper thing to do, but he could circumvent his second in command and give a direct order to a division commander under the second in command, couldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
And that doesn't mean he's under the direct command of the army commander.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But he can say, no, this is what I want you to do with this division.
Yeah,
right?
and in this case, I mean, all of them are present at the meeting. Could you, in the strictest military sense, if you're Lee, turn to General Longstreet and say, General Longstreet, tell General McLaws to place his troops like this, and then Longstreet turns to McLaws, General McLaws, place your troop like this. And there's examples of that in the Civil War. I mean, some guys follow that rigorous chain of command code, but I think with all 3 of them at the same meeting, that would be kind of ridiculous. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I've never been in the military.
Right.
By my simple civilian standards, that would be kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if they could debate it, and everything, but at the end of the day, the commanding general's word is what goes. So, that's what you got to do.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, so they get on the move. They're how far do they get before they realize? No, so first of all, McLaws's division is first in line.
Yes, that seems to be one of the few things everybody agrees on. McLaw's division in front with Kershaw's brigade in the lead.
McLaws himself, okay, 1 second. McLaws himself is up ahead of his division a bit with Captain Johnston.
Yes, according to McLaws. According to McLaws, he and Captain Johnston are riding ahead of the division. Johnston doesn't say that, and we don't. To the best of my, and again, folks, memory here, but to the best of my recollection, I don't know that we have a lot of accounts that confirm that, but McLaws says yes, he and Johnston are riding ahead of everybody.
Do we have reason to doubt anything McLaws would say? Like, is he a storyteller like Gordon?
Not a storyteller in the sense, obviously there was some post-war acrimony between Lee and McLaws. That's kind of well documented. Is McLaws saying things that would defend himself against any accusations that he might have been responsible for the delay and stuff like that? So one of the books that I alluded to earlier, Alan Johnson, do you guys know?
Yeah.
Alan Thompson. I'm sorry, I was thinking of Johnston. Sorry, Alan. I know you're probably listening. Take 2. All right. No, I was thinking of Johnston. Alan Thompson, who's actually a good friend of mine.
Great.
Stop. So Alan Thompson, he's probably best known a couple years ago in Gettysburg magazine. Yes. He did an article on Johnston's recon. That's where Johnston came in.
Okay.
Johnston's recon, and he's kind of combined that into a forthcoming book that he will then extend out to the countermarch. And the reason I'm plugging Alan here is you're asking a lot of the how can we, should we challenge McLaws's credibility? Folks, Alan goes into a lot of this in his forthcoming book. It's called In the Shadow of the Round Tops, and you're going to want to get a copy of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you wanted to say something before we get too far away from that moment.
Yeah, just a question here. Are they using multiple roads to get down to the southern end of the battlefield, or just one singular road? I mean, is it going to be one column on one road? And if that's the case, how long is this column?
Yeah. So the traditional interpretation was generally that. So in the morning, Hood's division comes in up the Chambersburg Pike, kind of files off to the side of the pike, while they wait for orders. McLaw's division comes in behind them, kind of follows off to the pike, waits for orders, so that when the movement starts, now back in the other direction, you kind of have McLaw's in front and Hood behind him. So the traditional interpretation of that has always kind of been that both sides more or less go down Hare Ridge Road, And so that, it's one big honking column. Basically, at that point, you're talking 2 divisions, right?
Right.
With the wagons, you're talking a couple miles long. So the traditional view, Mike, has always been that they start along Her Ridge Road, and then I won't get too far ahead, but, then they're going to kind of move on to some other highways.
I mean, really, going from where they're starting to where they want to end up, that's kind of your only choice, unless you want to go through fields.
Yeah. There's another possibility, which again I'm under a gag order for Mr. Thompson.
Oh, okay. You don't want to.
There's another there's another possibility that kind of is referenced in the historical record. And again, I don't want to feel like I'm stealing anyone's thunder before their own book comes out.
Right.
But there's going to be kind of an alternate route for some of this.
When's his book coming out?
Sometime this summer. I don't know the exact date.
But this might come out around that time anyway. Perfect.
Yeah.
So okay. So
I should add too that I've read the manuscript and provided a little dust jacket.
Oh, all right. Nice.
People like us will enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, all right. So then you.
The real stuff.
But you know what he's done, so we don't want you to give anything away there, and we don't.
His buddies, who are my buddies, will accuse me of stealing all his stuff. And,
maybe I'll wait until his book comes out and then put this out, just in case you slip.
What the hell? I'm giving up my evening to me. You're going to put this out now.
I'll put it out tomorrow. Don't worry about it. All right, I'll skip it ahead of all the other ones I have.
Exactly.
All right, so where did we leave off then? So McLeod is in the lead.
Yeah. Which everybody seems to agree on.
Right, okay. And he's up ahead, and where does he get? Was it Breams Hill that he gets to?
Yeah, so again, a lot of the where is the head of the column can come from Kershaw. Uh-huh. Kershaw has a relatively detailed report. He then writes in Battles and Leaders. There's at least one letter in the in with Batchelder. Some stuff. So Kershaw leaves a couple of accounts here. Kershaw basically says in I think it's Battles and Leaders, he basically says to the effect, we started near a lane that led to the Black Horse Tavern about 500 yards from our right, give or take.
Okay.
And so where a lot of people think that would kind of put Kershaw as a starting point would kind of be up around, sometimes it's often referred to as the Adam Butt property.
Oh, yeah.
Also maybe Samhertz. It's where they're putting in one of those repulsive housing developments today.
Yes.
Right? They're carving apart Her Ridge as all these people move here.
It's disgusting.
It's disgraceful.
Now that I've moved here, you all need to stop moving here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when you moved here, did you carve out the county with your luxury home?
No.
Right? You used existing
I used what
housing.
exists. I moved here to be here, not to change here.
Exactly.
Yes.
Everybody moves here because they love it here, and then they try to change it here.
I hate
it drives
that.
you crazy too.
It's absolutely.
So, anyways, back to the story.
Yes.
Kershaw would, by his description, kind of be starting there. And so what he says was, as we got into motion, General McLeod basically ordered us to kind of go by flank to the right, which would kind of veer them, if you're kind of looking at it and they're facing south, they would kind of veer to the right to get under the cover of basically Her Ridge.
Right.
So if you go down to the Black Horse Tavern Road, the ridge now, which would be to your left, the Confederate left, is now basically blocking any prying eyes, from the round tops or any other signal stations.
Yes.
So according to Kershaw, they basically file to the right. They go under the cover of Her Ridge. They continue to proceed along the Black Horse Tavern Road till they pass the tavern. They pass the tavern again, Black Horse Tavern, very memorable landmark. Mm-hmm. People got to mention it. Past the Black Horse Tavern, cross the Fairfield Road, which runs, in front of the tavern. And then shortly after crossing the Fairfield Road, when you start to come to Breams Hill and kind of the extension of Breams Hill is when, trouble begins.
Right, because they get up there and they can see the round tops and they can see the signal station waving flags and they go, well, if we could see them, they can see us.
That's exactly it. So the idea is, basically to continue along the road. The road kind of passes over, kind of an offshoot of the ridge.
Right.
And if we cross over the road, they're going to see us on the round tops. Now, McLeod later, said, well, we could see signal, the signal station and the flags waving and all that stuff. And again, people can kind of take him to task and say, oh, no, you can't see waving this or that from that distance. Okay, but the important point is everybody involved seems to understand if we pass over this hill, we're going to be observed. We got to find another way.
Right. So he sends word back to the division to halt.
Yeah.
And so they halt, which of course is going to cause the whole column to halt. And then what? Does Longstreet's riding with Hood, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the things too that sometimes leaves people scratching their head. And again, for anybody who wants to say, well, we're not even sure Johnston was guiding the column, because, part of the controversy and the mystery is Johnston later said, I didn't know that was my job. Longstreet's report, July 27th, says engineers, plural, sent out by the commanding general and myself, guided us to a road where we would have been observed. So anyways, you've got that dynamic going on. Longstreet says in one of his writings, well, I thought that kind of relieved me from the march, so I rode with General Hood in the middle, which is kind of one of those head-scratching sort of things. If you want to believe Longstreet is infallible, all-knowing Tom Berenger of the Killer Angels. That's what's going on there.
Is it when the column is on the march? Is it proper for the corps commander to be at the head of the column?
It doesn't have to be. I think the thing is, so first of all, we might wonder: is Longstreet sulking? Is he doing this, doing that? Did he? Is he peevishly not at the head kind of thing? There's so many things that are not unrecorded in history. Maybe he just said, hey, I got to talk to Hood about something.
Right.
We don't know.
Maybe he's thinking, if I'm in the middle, then if someone from the tail or the head needs to get up to me.
Easy to find me.
It's easy. Well, yeah, you have less distance to travel.
There could be all of those factors. And at the end of the day, we don't know.
Or how about this?
Well, go ahead. No, go ahead.
But what about so you got McLeod's division, Hood's division, Longstreet's in the middle at the head of Hood's, right? Let's say there's some kind of enemy attack from the left or the right. Isn't it easier then to turn those two divisions into battle line, and you want the corps commander to be central? So all he has to do is go back a bit.
Oh, there you go.
And set up his field headquarters. I don't know.
But it's a good idea. But no, the only thing I wanted to add, though, is so we don't know what was in Longstreet's heart and mind at that moment. I do think, however, it was noteworthy enough that he felt he had to mention it.
That he was in the center.
Yes, he specifically says, well, I rode with Hood because I kind of thought I was relieved from the march. And if it was standard operating procedure, not a big deal, you might not even mention it. I at least feel like by the time he's writing, I feel, and this is my personal opinion, if you disagree, send Matt Callery all the hate letters and all the Longstreet people out there. But I do kind of feel like by the time he's writing, it's at least enough of a, if this was such a screw up, how come you didn't do something at the front? Well, I was in the middle with General Hood kind of thing. So I do think there's a little bit of splaining going on there.
But also that notion of I was in the middle because I thought I had been relieved. That's
from
silly.
The march. It is silly.
That's silly. Yeah, from the march, right?
Like if you really said, well, I had important personnel matters to talk with General Hood. I rode in the middle.
Right.
Well, okay, that might make more sense. I felt, and again,
that sounds like sulking.
It does,
right?
kind of, doesn't it? It does sound a little peevish.
Yeah,
right.
It does.
Now, in the movie, right, him and Lee, the music is playing, and we must remember the empty chair and all that stuff. No, folks, none of that's probably going on.
Okay, so they sit there, and Longstreet comes up, and they hem and haw. But now, while they're hemming and hawing, Alexander comes over. E. Porter Alexander. Who is he, and what does he say to them?
Okay, so probably most of the listeners know who he is, but for anybody who's kind of new to the party, Edward Porter Alexander, right? He would normally command a battalion of reserve artillery in Longstreet's 1st Corps, but he is considered to be of such great ability and potential and all of that stuff that in a lot of cases they seem to be using him as the sort of the de facto commander of the 1st Corps artillery.
Who is the commander of the 1st Corps artillery?
Walton. Colonel Walton.
John Boy Walton?
Yeah, John Boy Walton, exactly.
I couldn't remember the first name.
John Boy.
So you're worried somebody doesn't know Alexander, but you just made a Walton's reference? There you go.
Yeah,
right after Lou Grand, I watched the Waltons every Monday night. Yeah. So anyways, Colonel Walton, he's older. They tend to defer to Alexander, and they give Alexander the real kind of tactical assignments, sort of thing. So anyways, earlier that morning, Alexander had been told, look, we're going to be moving opposite the Union left. Some scouting has been done, but kind of find a route, move your batteries into position, wait for the infantry. That's at least how Alexander described it, again, in his many accounts.
No, wait a second. Let me just ask you a question there. So they send him up with his artillery battalion, which is how many guns is that? Roughly, on paper.
Yeah, what's he got? Like 18 in that one? So I'm trying 6'3". I don't fucking know.
It's 4 guns to a battery. How many batteries to a battalion?
That's not. It's a uniform rule, but not.
Was it like
whatever?
No, I know. Yeah. I'm not asking for his actual number, but like just roughly on paper, what should it be that he's got?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how many batteries he's got in the battalion.
Is it 6? I want to say it's 24 or 32 sound
Hold
right.
on, everybody. 6 questions is looking up the answer. The point, though, that I think you're getting at, it's a big trail.
Well, it's a big trail, and also for them to go ahead of the infantry and wait. They sound vulnerable to me.
They are. And sort of, there's a piece of this we didn't touch on, which is Pendleton's report, Pendleton being the artillery commander of the Army. So you're talking about Pendleton. And he says in his report, he had done some reconnaissance work in the morning and that sort of thing. But he also talks about by what he says late morning, early afternoon kind of thing. He talks about, Colonel Alexander was basically brought up and told to kind of follow a route. And by the time this is Pendleton talking, by the time I showed the route to Alexander, it was becoming a little dangerous. Because you've got, all this stuff and all these movements going on. So you're right. If he goes down there by himself, he's vulnerable. But that's kind of what he said he did.
But where does he go and wait?
Well, that's part of the mystery. So what he says he does is he goes kind of down along Willoughby Run and kind of parks himself in and around the Pitzer Schoolhouse. Probably not right at that intersection, which would be the Millerstown Road, Willoughby Run Road.
So by the Eisenhower today.
Yeah, probably not right there. Because, again, I think if you park your guns there, you're really vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I think in that general area is where he says he goes. The closest Confederate infantry for him at that time would be Wilcoxs Brigade, which by that time would be moving in a position.
Yeah.
They have that firefight in Pitzer's Woods. Pendleton says that firefight is going on kind of while him and Alexander are kind of seeing to the route and all of that. But
so for those of you who are trying to get that in your head, Wilcox's Brigade is the extreme right of A.P. Hill's Corps,
right.
And they're roughly around where the amphitheater is today. Mm-hmm. So from, let's say, the Pitzer Schoolhouse area, which if you go to Longstreet's headquarters monument, it says it's 800 yards west of, or I don't know the exact wording, but it's basically west of this point.
Right.
And that puts it somewhere a little bit west of, I think, the Eisenhower driveway, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so if it's in that vicinity, let's say it's a little further west from there. So it's maybe a mile to Wilcox or so?
Yeah, by the way, I found the Alexander number. I did have this. Alexander, he says he had basically his 6 batteries, 24 24 pieces, 576 men.
Okay.
Now,
and horses, lots of horses.
Lots of horses with that. If I could, just as kind of a sidebar on that, and then we get back to this.
Go ahead.
Some accounts have him also leading the artillery battalions from Longstreet's First Corps, which is Henry for Hood and Cabell for McLaws. I don't think that's the case. I think they are marching with the divisions.
Oh, that's a good point to bring up. So he, like you said before, he's the reserve artillery commander. Right. So the Confederate Corps would have a reserve artillery battalion, but each division would have its own battalion as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking about the Washington, Louisiana Artillery Battalion either. He's not in charge of that either.
Yep.
That's Eshelman.
Eshelman, that's Eshelman.
And then sort of Walton would be over those guys, but then you would have Cabell's artillery with McLaws's division, you would have Mathis Henry with Hood, and then you would have James Deering with Pickett. Although, as we know, we're going in with one boot off, so Pickett's technically not here.
So, okay, so then, but the reason I bring this up, though, is because they're hanging out in that area. Now, I know earlier in the day, Buford's cavalry was out on the Emmitsburg Road, and he was sending patrols out along the Millerstown Road and wherever else he'd send them out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now, is Buford's cavalry still there, or have they gone by this point?
So they are, in my view, and they're in the process of leaving at this point.
Okay.
So, they've gotten that order to depart mid to late morning. Obviously, by the time the order's issued, you get it out to Buford. Buford's going to chew on some scenery a little bit.
It's going to speechify.
That probably took 3.5 hours. But all joking aside, what I will say, because a lot of times people forget about this, in some of the reports from Buford's guys talk about that they are still there and starting to deploy in support when Berdan's guys are having the firefight in Pitzer's Woods.
Okay.
So, and then it's during the process of that they get the orders to withdraw. And ironically, Buford says, I was replaced by the Third Corps under Dan Sickles, sort of thing. So, back to your point, I think by the time Alexander is really getting out there, if Buford hasn't totally left the scene, I personally believe he's departing, and you've got guys leaving.
So there's no patrols that would bump into Alexander or anything like that. Theoretically,
the possibility of it is there. Yeah. I would say theoretically there would be patrols, but ultimately we know it doesn't happen.
But now, an artillery battalion, the men of the battalion would have sidearms, right?
Yeah,
they're not sitting there, naked. They have pistols and
Buford hitting them with a cavalry charge, and the pistols come out. But again, didn't happen. But they would have been able to defend themselves without cavalry or infantry support. Well, they probably would have ran like hell, right?
That's what I would have done.
If they're limbered up, they're whipping those horses and getting out of there. Is kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay,
not to disparage Confederate artillery, because one thing I've learned, people love them some Confederate.
Oh, yeah. So no, I don't know why, but
those
they do.
Folks.
No, artillery is cool, though. All right, so Alexander goes back.
That's where we were.
Yeah, that's where we were. He says, well, I found this way. We can go this way and everything. They hem and haw. And the decision to turn around and find a more covered route is made. Essentially, right?
Yeah. If we could cover that, because being interested in this, giving Countermarch themed tours, without fail, the number one question I get is, well, why didn't they follow Alexander? It is without doubt the number one question I get related to this. Why didn't they see his trail? Why didn't they follow him? The interesting thing is, I was always more interested in the Longstreet infantry component of this. I never had a dog in the fight over where Alexander went and all of that stuff. I had a friend who kept telling me I was wrong about Alexander, and I keep saying to him, well, how can I be wrong? I've given you no opinion on it. How am I wrong? How is no opinion wrong? But it's
some friend.
I know. Well, a lot of my friends are like that. It's so ingrained. Why didn't they follow Alexander? It's crazy.
Yeah.
So anyways, according to Alexander, he comes back and he sees the infantry stopped at a hill. And again, nobody seems to kind of debate that. The question is, Are they at the hill he had earlier used? Because I don't think we mentioned this, but when he was going in a position before, he said he too crossed to the top of a hill, would have been visible to the signal station, easily passed around the hill, went off into some fields and some meadows. A couple hundred yards later, gets back on whatever road he's on and continues along the way. So he says that. So now he's wondering, okay, where's the infantry? Maybe to your point, Matt, maybe he's getting a little skittish about, okay, we're sitting out here twisting in the wind. Where's our infantry?
So he's going to look for them? Is that what he's doing?
Yeah, he says he goes back, long delayed support. Where are they kind of thing? And he says he sees them stopped at a hill. He doesn't say necessarily that they are stopped at his hill. Everybody's always assumed that. Everybody has always assumed, okay, they are stopped at the same hill Alexander does it. But, he doesn't say that. Now, why don't they follow him? There's obviously probably most of us have Fighting for the Confederacy at home on our bookshelves, which I think when people want to refer to Porter Alexander, that's the first one they pop off. As far as his published stuff, I always go back to, he's got an 1877 letter in the Southern Historical Society papers. And frankly, he references this. And that's always the first one I go to, because Fighting for the Confederacy, depending on when he actually wrote that, is written, 20, 25, maybe 30 odd years later when he was in Nicaragua. He doesn't, which isn't published until the late 20th century. But anyways, I always go to the Southern Historical Society one first from the 1870s. And he gives a reason why they won't follow him. And you want to know what that reason is?
Of course I do.
He says, for a reason I cannot remember.
Oh, E. Porter.
Exactly.
Jesus.
Yep. For some reason, quote, for some reason, which I cannot now recall, they would not turn back and follow the tracks of my guns. And I remember a long and tiresome waiting, end quote.
So has anybody put forth any theories as to what it was, the reason what might have been?
Sure. Well, so he does say in Fighting for the Confederacy, he does add a reason. And the reason he says in that is he comes up, there's some officers there. Note he doesn't say Longstreet is there, McLeod is there. He says there's some officers there, and there was no one there with the proper authority to diverge them from the route. So what happens? Does he come up, for example, meanwhile, McLeod is found out we're at this hill. According to McLeod, Johnston is with him. Longstreet comes back from the middle and says, why have we stopped? What's going on? According to McLeod says, well, look, and Longstreet immediately says, well, this won't do. Do we have another route? And, they supposedly go, as somebody describes it, reconnoitering the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, for example, does Alexander come up while they're off reconnoitering the neighborhood?
Okay.
Does Alexander come up kind of while things are getting started in motion? Again, Alexander says they're standing around. So my guess is, if you want to believe Fighting for the Confederacy, which, isn't necessarily true in every particular, even though we like to pretend it is, it's kind of a case of, okay, there was, I bumped into some junior officers. Nobody was going to kind of change the plan, particularly if all of your commanding officers are in a really pissed off mood. You might not want to be the kid who goes up to him and says, excuse me, sir, can we go over here? You might not want to be that guy.
Right.
So if I could, though, people always say, well, why didn't they see Alexander's trail? No, stop. Nobody says they didn't see the trail. What we don't know is why they didn't follow the trail. Do they think, was there some sort of obstruction that they didn't think, 2 divisions of infantry and wagons could go? Was that the obstruction? Or, did they just sort of think by that time they had an alternate route and they were going to stick to the alternate route? We don't know, folks. I know that's a crappy answer, but we don't know.
But you make a good point. People say, why didn't they just follow his, or how did they not see his trail? Is that what they say? Is how did they not see his trail?
That's the question I get a lot. Right. Why didn't they see Alexander's trail?
But that's quite an assumption to make, number one.
Yeah.
But also, your answer is good. Nobody says they didn't see it.
Right.
Did anybody say they saw it?
Yeah, I mean, people say easily visible. And it goes back to our comment before with all the guns and the batteries and the people. They're going to leave a visible trail. And Alexander and some of the other guys seem to say visible trail, but they don't follow it. And why they don't follow it, unless something shows up in somebody's attic, we'll probably never know with definitive certainty. Different theories, but we'll never know.
So they finally decide that they're going to go a different way. And what they decide is they're going to turn around a bit and then go and use the cover of trees on Seminary Ridge to shield their movement. Is that what they're essentially going to do?
A little bit. So the idea is, when Longstreet says, why this won't do, according to McLeod says, I have an alternate route. How do we get there? By countermarching. And so they countermarch. So countermarching, and I'm no reenactor, but countermarching is not an about face. Countermarching is kind of turning around and retracing some of your steps and getting in motion.
Like a snake.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. You should see the way Matt said snake. But of course,
I did say with a little bit of venom in it.
We're not on video today. So.
No pun intended.
Yeah. So they do. But to your comment, it's not the trees of Seminary Ridge, but they do get back under the cover of Hare Ridge. So according to Kershaw and some of the others, the head of the column countermarches back up the Black Horse Tavern Road. And again, this gets a little dicey too now because Kershaw leaves a couple of different versions. In one version, he kind of says, well, we went back to where we started and then cut across the ridge. And a lot of people have interpreted that as kind of a farm lane that, again, runs by the aforementioned Butt Farm. But in another account, Kershaw does talk about kind of going further back to some of the farm lanes that are kind of near Dr. Hall's house, Hall and Haas, Haas, which are kind of further up towards what is today Old Mill Road. And in some accounts, Kershaw kind of implies we went that far back and then turned around. And again, you kind of got different accounts that can support it, but what seems to be clear is the head of the column turns around, goes back up the Black Horse Tavern Road. Somewhere they're going to use some farm lanes then to kind of cut across Hare Ridge Road and then continue towards their destination.
I see. Okay.
And Mr. Lentz has got his finger in the air.
Michael, go ahead. Just jump in, Mikey.
So my question is this: all this movement all this movement happening in that one area. They have seen the signal station, or at least seen Little Round Top. Has any of the federal signal stations seen any of this movement going on at all?
That's a good question, Mike. So, there are a couple of surviving messages from the signal station. There is one at 1:30 p.m., and the one at 1:30 basically says that a heavy column of enemy infantry, about 10,000 strong, is moving from opposite our extreme left towards our right. That's the actual passage. So if you assume that time is right, that kind of then puts this in a 1:30 time frame. They're starting to see, and ironically, what they're seeing is the turnaround. Now then they're going to add at 2:10 p.m. That those troops were passing on the by road from Dr. Hall's house towards Hare Tavern. And again, that would kind of bring Dr. Hall's place into it. Yeah, Mike. So 1:30, 2:10, we've got, two messages from the Little Round Top signal station that would seem to, or the Round Top, I should say, to be precise, signal station that would kind of put them in that framework.
So it sounds to me then that all this countermarching and hemming and hawing over what to do is kind of moot because they're seen anyway.
Well, that's part of it, that you kind of debate. I mean, obviously, and again, a lot of people will kind of say, well, why didn't they just say screw it at that point and keep going? Clearly, Longstreet at this point seems to be willing to sacrifice speed to obtain secrecy.
Okay.
Now, that turnaround, which kind of looks like, okay, we're turning around, and from the signal station perspective, we're seeing a body of troops go from opposite our left to our right. The deception there would seem to be working, right? Because now we think the Confederate troops are going towards our right. And then, of course, what the signal station either doesn't see or ultimately doesn't report on is the turnaround again when they're going to go back to the left. So, the deception is kind of working at this point, but obviously we're giving up more speed and more time for it.
Right. So one thing I want to jump back to what I meant to ask you before, but we got whatever. When we're trying to figure out what roads that Alexander took and everybody else and all that, do we have any civilian accounts of Longstreet's men marched by us today?
Yeah, good question.
I would imagine that if someone had left an account along the way, that would maybe shed some more light on things. Have we not found anything, or do they?
Tilly Pierce saying, "No, mother, they are in my yard," kind of thing. That's a great point. I have never. I mean, I'm trying to think. I have never come across one. If somebody else has come across something, I'm not aware of one.
I would imagine if someone did, it would be big news.
Well, and the interesting thing too is this part of her ridge is populated. Yeah. You have the Black Horse Tavern that's occupied. You have the
Hall. You mentioned
Hall, Haas, Butt or Herbst, either one. Somebody's at the Butt farm. So these places are out there, and to my knowledge, no. But I'd love to see one.
Yeah, that would be great if something turned up. Everybody, check your attics. All right, and then so another thing I wanted to get to was you mentioned how when they countermarched, they turned around. It was more like a snake. Yeah. Than it was what we would imagine. Like, you would think the smart thing to do would be order an about face of the whole column, and now the tail is the head, and you march. But they didn't do that. Right. They snaked around. Why?
Yeah, well, and again, I don't think we don't have a clear answer on why. I think there's a couple thoughts on this. At some point, this is quickly falling apart, right? And if Longstreet wasn't...
You're talking about the show or the march?
Both, right? Both.
Nah, just kidding. Go ahead.
Snake.
I had to make a self-deprecating joke.
No, that's good. Oh, I thought that was a shot at me.
No, that was
me. Yeah.
No, it's all of us. It was a self-deprecating.
People are on the edge of their seats. This show is great.
All right, go ahead.
What the hell was the question?
I don't remember.
Oh, countermarch.
Why not about face and go instead of snaking?
So a couple thoughts. As the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863 is falling apart for General Longstreet.
There you go.
There's confusion. Now there seems to be accounts of Hood's front crowding into McLeod's rear.
Right.
Seems to be some of that going on. Supposedly at some point, Longstreet allegedly says, to the effect of McLeod's, look, there's a lot of confusion going on here. Why don't we let Hood take the lead? McLeod's kind of says, no, sir, I have the honor of the lead, and you will accord it kind of thing. Yeah. And Longstreet acquiesces. So, obviously then that would not facilitate an about face. You would countermarch kind of thing. I think the other thing too, and I don't pretend to know all the preferred tactics on all of this stuff and that sort of thing, but this is a big mass of humanity.
Sure.
Right? There's guys and wagons and artillery and ambulances and two distinct divisions kind of moving together. Personally, I'm thinking with a group that size, and although everyone today looks at it and says, well, it would have been a lot faster if they about faced, I'm thinking if you about face, you got mass confusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why?
Right. Well, I mean, think about it. Like, even we have smaller examples of this during the course of the battle. A regiment goes in quickly and the guys who are normally in the back or in the front kind of thing. What if you've got all these kind of wagons following behind and you about face? Now the wagons are in
the wagons, that's going to be the hard. You got to turn those around. That's not that easy to do on narrow roads.
So, an about face is kind of more of a static thing. A countermarch is, when you're in motion and kind of
That's a good point, Jim. So you get the wagons all mixed in there. And the artillery battalions are with them too, right?
Yeah. Right.
So that's not easy to. You can't do a K-turn with a wagon drawn by horses or a field piece.
And so again, folks, nobody ever said that. I'm just sort of throwing that out there too. The only thing that I'm aware of that was ever physically said was kind of that McLeod's Longstreet exchange to the effect of, "No, sir, I shall lead," kind of thing.
Right. Okay, and I guess it also makes sense that McLeod retains the lead because he is supposed to file in line to the right of Anderson's division that's already up there, right?
Yep, they're going to go first.
And so that's going to, when they get to the area they're going to be, it makes sense that the head of the column finds it, gets in, and goes in line, and then Hood goes right next to him.
Yeah, imagine now Longstreet's going to have to go back and ride with Hood again and explain all the changes. I mean, that could that could take another
Apparently
3 hours.
Hood needed his handheld.
Yeah. Imagine that.
All right, so then they do their counter-marching.
Mm-hmm.
They get to where they need to be.
Yep.
And then the rest, as they say, is history, right? The battle takes place. Or is there anything more you want to add?
Yeah, one thing led to another, and the South lost the war kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, what else do I want to talk about there? I think the big thing would just be, and we might have touched on it at the beginning, the amount of time consumed. As we said before, my guesstimate is at least 90 minutes. Alexander said 2 hours. So going back, coming back around, they then pick up the Willoughby Run Road somewhere and basically take the Willoughby Run Road. They're doing all of this to avoid only about a 3/4 of a mile stretch on the Black Horse Tavern Road. So, you're doing all of this, you're coming back around 3:30-ish, you start to approach Seminary Ridge. McLeod basically says, to Longstreet, Longstreet says to McLeod, how are you going to go in? McLeod says, well, that'll depend on what's in my front. Longstreet allegedly says to McLeod, nothing is in your front. You're on the flank of the enemy. And Shazam, right? When they get up there, Dan Sickles is at the Emmitsburg Road, and now they're facing a Union left that didn't look anything like they envisioned, when they started earlier that morning, or when this all started in the morning.
My question is, why didn't they just continue going, and every time they came to a clearing, duck or crawl?
Yeah, do the fireman's crawl or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, only 12,000 guys. Yeah, it'd be easy, right?
Come on. They're healthy young men, right? They're in good shape.
Yeah.
They don't have bad backs like I do. I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to crawl. All right, so what we're going to do then is we're going to take our break, and we're going to come back with questions from our patrons over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg. That's how you get to ask questions on Ask a Gettysburg Guide. And that's it. So a couple of minutes, we'll be right back.
For the Historian has a wide variety of titles, new and used, of military books from publishers like Osprey, Gettysburg Publishing, Stackpole, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more. I make it a point to go there once a week because I have new bookshelves to fill and I never know what treasures I'll find, and neither will you. They even have toy soldiers, model kits, games, children's books, and more. So stop by and check them out on your next visit to Gettysburg, or better yet, order right now online at forthehistorian.com and mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund you your shipping. And if you call 717-685-5207 or stop by the store on your next visit and mention us, you'll get 20% off retail price. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum, is housed in the historic Lutheran Seminary building constructed in 1832, a witness to the first day of battle. The museum's 3 floors of exhibits connect visitors to the dilemmas that led to the Civil War, provide a powerful and personal view of the battle's first day, and explore one of the battlefield's largest hospitals. No visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center is complete without a guided tour of the building's famous cupola, where on the eve of battle, officers and civilians saw thousands of Confederate soldiers' campfires burning to the west, and Brigadier General John Buford watched for vital federal reinforcements as fighting erupted on the morning of July 1st. Today, you can stand where Buford stood and discover how this view helped chart the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete without a serious visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum. Purchase tickets online at seminaryridgemuseum.org or call 717-339-1300. To get tickets or a cupola tour, listeners may call or walk in and mention Addressing Gettysburg, or by ordering online using the promo code AG1863 for 20% off. Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. It began here.
There's a devil to pay.
If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There you'll find apparel, drinkware, decor, and more, featuring a wide range of interests from the ancient world to the Cold War. Looking to make an impression with the perfect gift? Well, TR Historical now offers gift cards and a vintage wrapping service for a truly unique presentation. And our listeners will receive 10% off plus free shipping in the U.S. when you use promo code GBERG1863. So go to trhistorical.com, TR Historical, for the love of history.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg Podcast with Matt Callery.
Okay, and we are back now for the question segment of this Ask a Guide, the asking part, if you will. Don't forget, you got to be a patron over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg to ask these questions. And today, starting off, is a longtime patron, nice guy, met him a couple times, Roy Mead. He says, is it known how much Longstreet kept Lee informed of Longstreet's countermarch and his corps' progress? Basically, you know, was he communicating with Lee the whole time?
Yeah, great question. We didn't touch on that. This is again another one of those sort of mysteries of the second day. What people always tend to go to first is Fremantle's account, where he basically says General Lee was at the seminary kind of during the attack and, you know, just took one or two messages. And I've seen a lot of people interpret that as saying Lee was at the seminary all day. That's not what Fremantle says.
Okay.
Fremantle says Lee gets there basically as the attack was beginning. Where was he before that? I think I'm going to make a George Newton reference here. Anybody remember Licensed Battlefield Guide George Newton? Silent Sentinels, the artillery.
Oh,
yeah. He's gone off to. He's enjoying a lovely retirement, I think, in the Carolinas. George, if you're a listener, Newton told me one time, and I forget what the number was. It was something like there's like 7 references to Lee actually being more down by the south end of the field during the course of the day, and I can't pretend that I know all 7 of them off the top of my head. I know Pendleton in his report, though, says to the effect that at one point he bumped into Lee headed towards Pitzer's Woods. Longstreet, in at least one of his writings, says to the effect of, you know, General Lee rode with me for a mile or more. During some of the back and forth with Hood, it is, you know, remember when Hood gets into position, you know, and all that stuff. It's intimated that Lee is with Longstreet for at least part of that. So I think the not so short answer to the question is we've got a lot of accounts from the staff that I think would indicate Lee is at least aware of some of it. You know, not none of it. He's not off at the seminary, you know, whittling sticks, you know, for the whole thing.
Right.
I think at least during some of this, Lee is probably at least aware that, okay, Longstreet's not in position yet and, you know, that sort of thing.
You raise a good point when you talk about Fremantle's account, and you were like what you're basically saying, and I think everybody who studies anything really should pay attention to this, but a history especially, is words matter. Like, pay attention to the words people use. Yeah. Don't make assumptions. Don't fill in the blanks. What words do they use? This always bothered me in relationships. I use my words very carefully. I choose my words carefully. I use them according to my choices, and still my girlfriends misinterpret what I'm saying. And I go, no, this is the plainest English that I can use, and I'm saying what exactly I think and feel, and you don't need to guess. There's no guessing.
So this is now a dating advice show?
This is a dating advice show. Men, use your words carefully. No, and so I think in history it's the same thing. You know, especially back then, I think someone like Fremantle would have chosen his words very carefully. He would have had a command of the English language. He's a colonel. from England, of all places.
That's right.
Right?
The Queen's Own.
Yeah, the Queen's Own. So, I mean, yeah, people, you got to, people from a certain time, especially that time, they were good with words.
You're so right. They were much more verbose and verbal than we are today. The problem with as a historian, you're kind of expected to fill in the gaps and interpret.
Sure.
Right? Somebody told me that one time. Well, Jim, the job is to interpret, kind of thing. I think my problem comes in, though, and this is one of my pet peeves, and it has nothing to do with dating and all of that stuff. My pet peeve is when people turn interpretation into facts.
Yeah.
Well, we know Lee was here. No, we don't know that.
Don't.
And
right.
don't be afraid to say you don't know that. That's my pet peeve.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it is the historian's job to interpret, but, we're talking about the Civil War, not hieroglyphics. It's the same language. It's not very long ago. Mm-hmm. People can understand this stuff without having to interpret much.
Yeah.
But you're right. You do have to sometimes fill in the blanks. And you do that with the accounts of other people, and you go, like a detective.
But if you're clear, that you're so, well, here's my theory versus this is an uncontroverted fact. No, almost none of it is. And by the way, before we move on to the next question, I hope you find love.
Thank you, Jim. I've given up on it, though. Charles Fuller has the next question.
You're married to your podcast.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And this is trouble enough. What was the condition of McLaws' division on day 2 in the morning as far as fatigue, distance marched, etc., compared to the condition of Hood's?
Oh, yeah, interesting question. First Corps for the past few days, past couple of days, had been in and around the Chambersburg area. And, initially had things turned out differently, we could be doing the Addressing Chambersburg podcast. Because, I think that was one of Lee's thought about points of concentration. So I do think there's a couple of days there where they're not doing hard marching. And then obviously the morning of the 1st, everybody's on the move to Gettysburg and that sort of thing. Hood and McLaws' divisions both got into Marsh Creek, the Marsh Creek campsite, very late on the evening of July 1st into the morning of July 2nd. And you know what really amazes me, though?
What?
When I read about these people, how early then they get up in the morning.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm serious. Like, you're marching all day, and then, we were up at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So from that point of view, there can't be a lot of rest being had. But I would, if you have to kind of score a point for somebody, I would give McLaws a little bit of an advantage just because of the whole situation with Law's Brigade. They're waiting for Law. Law marches 20 plus miles to get in here, then gets into, action on July 2nd and is the first brigade sent in.
Yeah.
So in terms of conditioning, I don't think either division is really blown out because, again, I think they've had a few days in and around, Lentz's hometown. But I do think, give a little bit of an advantage to McLaws because of the Law situation.
Jay Stew says, was the entire column on the march at once? Did the tail end never move? So I guess, is he asking, what do you think? What is he asking?
Well, what I think he's probably asking, about the backside, and we have a tendency to always do this, right? We always talk about the head of the column.
Yeah.
The back end of this column is Hood, and Hood's route is not nearly as, I don't even say well documented, because how well documented is McLaws? But Hood's movements are even less documented than McLaws, is I guess what I want to say. But they do move. The question is really, probably especially to the question as you get to the back end of Hood's division, they ain't doing a lot of countermarching. If they're probably not doing any, countermarching is turning around.
Right.
They're probably not doing a whole hell of a lot of turning around at all. And again, but Hood's guys also do complain about a circuitous route and what I think Evander Law calls vexatious delays and many sort of indirect turns and that sort of thing. So I sometimes hear people say Hood's guys are not affected at all, and I don't think that's the case either.
Right, and I guess I see what I'm looking at a map now in the Leno book of the Countermarch, and I guess what he's asking is the tail
barely even leaves the Chambersburg Road area. Yeah. By the time they realize that, they don't get very far, in other words.
Yeah.
Like, okay, sorry about that, Jay Stu. Now I get what you're saying. Phil says, how certain are we of the actual route of the countermarch? Are there different accounts that portray different routes? You kind of touched on that in the last answer, but go ahead.
I did, and I'll plug Alan Thompson's book again. So In the Shadow of the Round Tops, which is coming out summer of 2023, he will propose his own route, which is a little different than the traditional route. A lot of the same roads involved, because look, folks, I mean, we've got Her Ridge, we've got Black Horse Tavern Road, we've got Willoughby Run Road, and then you've got some farm lanes in between. The problem ultimately with all of this, going, kind of into the question without giving, let Alan speak to his own theory, but the question with all of this is you don't have an account that says, we turned left at the Fairfield Road, we went half a mile, then we went up Willoughby Run Road, then we turned left here.
Right.
You don't have any account that does that. And so, there's a lot of theory and speculation. I think for the most part, though, we have a general idea. Again, the devil's in the details. And for nerds like us, we want the details.
Of course. Philip May says, I have tried to locate the spot where Longstreet's column was spotted by the U.S. signal station on Little Round Top. Question. Can that spot be found today, or is the changing landscape, i.e. trees and private properties, preventing me from finding that sight line?
Yeah, great question. I have personally never been able to see it from Little Round Top due to tree coverage and all of that stuff. If any of my colleagues are listening, I know sometimes they'll, this guy will go up with a flag and that guy will have a flashlight 3 miles away. I'd be curious if any of my friends and colleagues have ever seen it from Little Round Top. I've never been able to see it from Little Round Top, but I have been able to see it from the Longstreet Tower. And the primary reason why I can pick it out from the Longstreet Tower is because a friend of mine lives kind of right at the intersection of the Plank Road and the Black Horse Tavern Road. And he has a big red distinctive shed in his backyard, which is, a couple 100 feet from the turnaround point.
Okay.
So I can go up to the Longstreet Tower, and on a good day, I can see his shed, but I've never been able to see it myself from Little Round Top.
Huh, that's interesting.
I will interject here.
Go ahead.
That whole out with a flashlight and with a flag seems like a good hazing prank potential going on here.
Maybe, right? Well, maybe we should go out tonight. You go to the hill, I'll go to Little Round Top.
Yeah, Mike, you go on Little Round Top.
Well, wait a minute, we can't go to Little Round Top. I forgot about that. Never mind.
Jake, who's the other owner of Gettysburg, and I, this was his idea, though. We wanted to do, because what is it, Jack's Mountain, they had a where they make Jack's cider. No, they had a signal station there.
Yeah,
and what is it, 10 miles away, I think, something like that. And we want to just see, can you see that far?
Yeah, Randy. Do you know Randy Dreyes?
Yeah.
He's been on the show, Battle of Gettysburg buff. I know him and some of his friends have done that. They've had a guy on the mountain with the flag, and I want to say they put somebody maybe at the Pennsylvania Monument on top or something like that. And I wasn't there, but my recollection is they had success doing that.
Wow. So Jake wanted, because Jake's a science nerd, so he wanted to use lasers.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Joe DeFuria says, wait, did I already? No, I didn't. Joe DeFuria says, it seems that no one on the Confederate side was aware that Sickles had moved his corps to the Peach Orchard until McLaws arrived in that vicinity with his division. How did this escape the notice of everyone until then?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to stuff like this. From the point of view of, well, first of all, with hundreds and thousands of people in the vicinity, you probably shouldn't assume it escaped everybody's attention.
Good point.
Right. The question is really more, did anybody report it to somebody who can make a difference?
Right. I mean, I would imagine that Wilcox's men had to have seen this.
They just had the firefight in Pitzer's Woods, right? And
now you know what's going on.
A couple 100 yards away along the Emmitsburg Road.
But that means then it's got to go to Wilcox, who's got to send it up to Anderson, who's got to send it up to AP Hill, who's got to send it up to Lee, who then has to send it down to Longstreet.
Exactly.
And so that could take hours.
Exactly, that sort of thing. And, from the point of view if I'm a guy in Wilcoxs Brigade, let's say for example, and that's a maybe, I've been told Longstreet is coming up on my right. I might not know a damn thing about what's coming up on my right. But if you assume Longstreet's coming up on your right, okay. Some of those Yankees are over there, thick as fleas along the road. I mean, so what?
Yeah.
You don't know what the big picture plan is. Well, I know Longstreet's countermarching back there because I heard it on the podcast. You don't know anything about other than, okay, let's get some bacon together or maybe get a nap or something.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Yeah,
so it's a good question though. But
okay, Steve R says a prior guest on Addressing Gettysburg described Lee's unhappiness with McLeod's based on McLeod's performance at Chancellorsville, and Lee relayed this to Longstreet. Longstreet seemingly calmed Lee from getting rid of McLeod and took personal responsibility for McLeod during the march to Gettysburg. Is this your perspective? And if so, do you think this impacted anything on July 2nd?
1863. Yeah, well, again, I would file that one, kind of what I said before, into a theory more than an ascertainable fact. Longstreet and McLeod did have a pre-war relationship, and certainly were on good terms prior to Gettysburg. So I certainly think if McLeod was in any hot water, and we touched about this earlier, so I won't go back to it, but if McLeod was in any hot water because of his performance during the Chancellorsville campaign, do I think it's possible that Longstreet might have tried to intercede for his friend? Absolutely.
Sure.
We don't know that for sure. To me, though, the interesting thing about it is Longstreet seems to micromanage McLeod so much that, a couple days later, McLeod is like writing a very unhappy letter to his wife. It's a couple days later. It's still July 1863. I'm not talking about an account written, 40 years later. But, McLeod is writing to his wife, a couple of days later. Longstreet is a humbug, obstinate, overbearing, exceedingly conceited, unchivalrous, and all of that stuff. He failed to reconnoiter the ground, and when his errors were pointed out to him, and all of that stuff. So, if the idea was for Longstreet to kind of help his buddy out, it kind of seems like it backfired.
Yeah,
right?
Didn't appreciate it.
Yeah,
it
the buddy's kind of like, "Hey, screw you! I can," and doesn't get.
Well,
that.
do you think that maybe he just had a chip on his shoulder because his name is Lafayette?
Well, it's funny you say that because I always say Lafayette, and I had a big countermarch group tour one time, and everybody was going, Jim, it's Lafayette, kind of thing. And you know what I said?
What?
On my tour, it's Lafayette.
Yeah, good.
On your tour, you can call him whatever you want. So.
Please. Chuck Critchfield, he's very verbose here, and forgive me, Chuck, if I screw up what you're saying. Several years past, I researched George W. Peterkin, the first bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of West Virginia, who was an aide to William N. Pendleton from 1862 to 65 for a presentation for a local Civil War roundtable. Peterkin's diary is quoted in the Peterkin biography as the following, quote, "I started very early and reconnoitered the right. Troops on left and center stationary. Longstreet moving, reconnoitered the front. Guided General McLeod to road along Creek Bottom towards the Peach Orchard. The battle commenced on General Longstreet's front. We left the field about 8:30. Can you explain or expand on Peterkin's role that day? Who the hell is this guy?
Wow, yeah, that's a source that you almost never see cited.
I've never heard of him.
Is the question implied? He's a member of Pendleton's staff.
Got it.
And so to that, I touched on this a little bit earlier. Pendleton, in his report, and it's funny, usually we don't want to rely on anything Pendleton says, except the morning of July 2nd. Then all of a sudden, Pendleton is, this source we all go to for this stuff. But Pendleton, in his report, again, talks about his early morning scouting and reconnaissance work and that sort of thing. And Pendleton refers to what he calls the Ravine Road the ravine road, plainly obvious, and we used the ravine road, which I've always interpreted, and I think others probably have as well, as basically the ravine being Willoughby Run.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as the question kind of implies, this guy basically says in his diary, as part of Pendleton's staff, I knew about the ravine road, the Willoughby Run road, and I guided McLaws along it. So, I kind of wonder, after they countermarch, does, this guy kind of come along and say, come along and I'll show you along the ravine road? Is that what he's talking about? Remember in his report, Longstreet said engineers, plural.
Right.
I mean, is this one of the staff officers who's kind of guiding him around? It's a really intriguing kind of, hey, I wonder what this guy's role was, to literally say, hey, I guided General McLaws like that. And it's a source that almost nobody ever quotes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Michael Wilson, not a question, but a thought. Getty's nerds often debate what unit in the Army, Union Army, played the most significant role in the battle. I suggest that the Signal Corps detachment on Little Round Top is the clear winner. What other unit can turn around an entire Confederate corps? That delayed Longstreet's assault by several hours. It gave Sykes and then Sedgwick time to move their corps into position at a critical time. I might be prejudiced since I am a retired Army Signal Corpsman. Well, thank you for your service, sir.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
That's Michael. So yeah, go ahead.
Huzzah for the Signal Corps. Oh, great. I mean, I don't know that there was a question there as much of as just sort of an observation.
Just a thought is what he said.
Certainly.
Well, there was a question. What other unit can turn around an entire Confederate corps? That was the question in there.
Custer's Michigan Cavalry Brigade? No, folks, I'm not really proposing that.
It wasn't a corps, though. It was, right?
But no,
well, it was.
It could have, yeah.
Yeah.
Stewart's Division could have been a corps.
Really been, yeah, because it was its own thing.
And it wouldn't have mattered if it was a corps because it's Custer.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have mattered.
Custer's Superman.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, great point. We often don't talk about the Signal, the Signal Corps as much as we should, right? It's usually the infantry and the artillery, and then maybe some cav gets thrown in. So certainly the, the part they played in all of that is, certainly significant. I don't got much more to say here than hurrah or huzzah. Yeah,
I mean, their purpose wasn't to go up there to turn the corps around. They had no idea. Day. It was just luck. But it was what, Mike?
You know what's the weird irony of all of this?
What?
Who was the one man before the war who really got his hands into the Signal Corps?
Yeah. Yep.
E.P. Alexander.
Yep. We talked.
At Manassas, wasn't he one of the?
He was a Signal Corps officer.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
So there you go.
And I'm going to plug my book for a minute because we touched on that in Gettysburg Speech Orchard. James Hessler and Britt Eisenberg on sale everywhere, folks. But we did talk because you're right.
Yeah.
The irony. And, the irony of that, and you kind of think about, so Alexander's looking at hills and signal stations, and, this is a guy who would probably know.
Right, because he's been on that other side of it. Yeah.
And just because he's so damn smart.
And I forgot that, right? He sends that message, your left is turned or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Is he the one that sends it, or is he just part of the Signal Corps unit?
He's the one credited with most of the time, yeah.
And then here he is being seen.
Exactly.
And then finally, hold on, I have to get back into my, all of a sudden my iPhone is not recognizing my face, which I guess is good. The last question is from James Hessler. He asks, does it matter?
Yes. What a provocative listener
this guy
James
is a thinker.
Hessler is. That guy's a deep thinker. Well, tying it all into a bow, as we like to say, right?
Yeah.
You go through all of this. Alexander, coming back to the aforementioned Porter Alexander, said, okay, it was a 2-hour delay, but probably didn't really affect the outcome of the battle. And I tend to think, and look, I've done countermarch tours. I've had Dan Patterson, Longstreet's great-great-grandson. I've had Longstreet enthusiasts, I've had Longstreet haters, I've had all of the above, and almost universally people always kind of say, it didn't matter. What difference does it make? 1 hour, 2 hours, what difference does it make kind of thing? And my take on that is, did it matter? Maybe. How's that for a non-definitive response, right? Because if you think about it, and I kind of played this out one time, I kind of broke the morning down into different time intervals and said, okay, how many Union troops are on, the Union left at different time intervals? And if Longstreet gets there 90 minutes to 2 hours earlier, in some ways the Union left does look radically different.
Yeah.
If you get there, let's say you get there after Buford has left, so the cavalry screen is gone.
Right.
After Buford is left, but before Sickles has moved forward. Let's say you either have Sickles kind of on the move a little bit, sort of thing, before the 6th Corps has started to arrive. The 6th Corps arrival is important because that gave Meade the flexibility to move the 5th Corps to the left. I could argue that if you are attacking 90 minutes to 2 hours earlier than you do, you actually are attacking a considerably weaker Union left flank. You can't presuppose that no matter what happens, the Army of the Potomac is still going to win the battle. Right? Because otherwise, what's the point of any of this?
Right.
So, did Longstreet's countermarch hurt the Confederates? We don't know, but it didn't help.
No.
So, from that point of view, there's maybe an impact there. I'll just close with one more thought. I'm pretty sure Coddington said by attacking when he did, Longstreet hit the Union left at exactly the right time. And that might be one of the few times where I would openly disagree with the esteemed Coddington on that.
I like what you say. I wouldn't say maybe. I would say yes, it probably would have, because like you point out, like Sickles wasn't online yet.
Yeah.
You could have caught him en route to where he wanted to go and just knocked him out.
Yep.
And then you have the round tops, and you have that, that piece of ground between the round tops and the PA Memorial, and you could have gotten the Tawnytown Road theoretically because the other reserves that are coming up are not there.
Yeah.
So, it could have been a completely different story.
I've probably told you this story before, but, one time I was doing a Pickett's charge analysis, and the guy looked even more bored than usual. And I kind of said to the guy, hey, what's going on? And he says, well, all of this is pointless. And I said, well, why is this pointless? And he said, Lee couldn't win because he was outnumbered. And I'm kind of like, okay, so, that pretty much throws almost every battle of the Eastern Theater off the table, including Chancellorsville kind of thing. But my point is, for us as armchair warriors, we can't recreate morale factors, panic, hitting somebody and striking fear, throwing one corps back onto the other kind of thing. As armchair generals, we can't do that.
Right.
But so, had Longstreet, like you say, hit Sickles where he was kind of offline, what would that have done to who knows?
Right.
We don't know. So
but that's such a great point, though. And I always try to remind myself of that. Like, we can't account for all those things you mentioned: fear, hunger, thirst, exhaustion.
Yeah.
Have you ever gotten to the point? I bet you most people have not driven themselves to the point where they literally could not take one more step.
Right.
And they just say, I have to stop. I just have to stop. These guys had to be pushed. A lot of them gave out, but yeah.
Yeah. Today we put the podcast soundboard on pause. We get a Snickers bar. We take a slug of the sparkling spring water, and we continue. And stuff we can't recreate.
And then we go, oh, I'm so tired.
Oh, my back.
My back hurts from sitting.
Yeah.
My throat hurts from talking. And got to go home and take a bath. Take a hot bath. Calgon, take me away. These poor boys wish they had Calgon.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Jim, for coming on again. Always fun with you.
Yeah, always fun. Thank you, guys.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Mikey, thanks for sitting in and throwing your 2 cents. Oh, did you have a question for Jim? Because had
a couple.
I had a couple already.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Comments.
Just wanted to make sure because
maybe it wasn't 6, but it was enough.
Yeah, it was enough. It was enough. And you threw in your own thoughts too, so that counts towards it. Anyway, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening. We will talk to you later. Bye. Alrighty.
All right. Your turn.
Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted. Greg said, my unit has purchased from him in the past quality badges, and good service. And Jerry S. says the Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg.
Our hearts so stout have got us famed, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and hay.